To kick off this session here, I want it to be an inspirational document, particularly for my 4 grandsons, but for every child that age. That you can do things. Don't let the turkeys get you down, and don't adopt an attitude of, this is why we can't do it, or that's why we can't do it. You can do things if you make up your mind to do them. And so then, getting started on all this, well, I thought I would kick it off by saying, how does Silicon Systems, what caused or led to its conception? And that was that I and Bill Drobish and Ron Reeder in particular were working for a computer company which had gotten bought up by Xerox. We worked for Scientific Data Systems, and then it got bought up by Xerox. SDS was a great company, but when Xerox bought it, I ended up being sent to Poughkeepsie, New York to meet the CEO, C. Peter McCullough, and after one meeting with him, I knew I didn't want to work for that company much longer. And I started trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And talking to a lot of people, there was a guy down at Texas Instruments named Ron Johns that gave me an idea. He said, we have big, customers, like, for example, Digital Equipment Corporation, that, buy a lot of integrated circuits from us. And occasionally they want a custom integrated circuit that's going to be very low volume, and we don't want to put our engineers on designing it. So he said, we know you guys can do a pretty good job of designing chips, so if you start a company, we'll send you people like DEC. You can design the chip for them and send us the mask set. We'll process wafers, send them back, you test the wafers, package the chips, test them again, sell them to the customer. DEC's happy, you got a business for yourself, and you've solved a problem that we have of these people complaining to us all the time that they can't get their custom integrated circuit. So I took that concept and I talked to Bill and to Ron about it, and I don't remember the conversation, but obviously they bought into it. So we went off to UCLA that fall semester and arrogantly took this course on how to start a high-tech company. And we used the concept for Silicon System as our project. And at the end of the semester, I resigned. Now, Ron and Bill didn't resign. They weren't quite as gutsy as I was. But I turned in my resignation, and I didn't end up leaving right away because they kept saying, you'll get to stay longer while we find somebody to replace you. Finally, they looked under their nose and found Marty and replaced me with Marty. So in June of '72, Betty and I moved to Orange County. We decided we were going to locate there. We had strategically figured that we needed to be near an airport that had quick access to Silicon Valley in particular, and other places. I rented an office and I moved in on July 1st of 1972, all by myself. And I tried to order a phone, and there was our first obstacle. Phone company went on strike that day. They were on strike for 6 weeks, and I couldn't get a phone. So I sat there fretting, what have I done? What have I gotten myself into? And Bill and Ron are saying, we're anxious to come. As soon as you have a contract signed up, so there's a guaranteed way you can pay our salary, we'll be right there. So how do you start a company with no employees and go off and talk to the likes of TI or Signetics or Fairchild or somebody like that and try to tell them you'll design some kind of chip for them better than they can, and you don't even have any employees. That was a hurdle, but God knows, somehow I did it. And I got at least one, you guys remember, was it 1 or 2 contracts in the beginning?
I don't know.
But they were for Mecco. It was a 256-bit Mecco 10K RAM, wasn't it?
Yeah, 256-bit RAM. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we got started on a 256-bit, and then they suddenly changed it to the 1024-bit, or added that, and then we went back and finished up the 256-bit later, I guess. But there we were. We had no equipment during those months leading. So I got the contracts in December, and late December maybe, and Ron and Bill turned in their resignations and showed up. I think Ron came first, didn't you? I don't remember now.
I don't know. Could be.
But in short order, the 2 of them came on board, and then of course, well, God, what do we do for a computer? We don't have any money for a computer, so somehow we finagled time on a SDS computer over at UCI. If we would come in and a graveyard shift, they had some time when it wasn't being used, we could use that. So we did that in the beginning. So that's kind of how we kind of got started. And so, you know, Ron, pick it up from there. What do you remember about doing those chips? What were the problems you had?
Well, you talk about the graveyard shift. Yeah, we had this access to the computer through a little typing. I don't know what you call them, but I would take it home with me at night and run all these spice files. So that got to be, we did a lot of midnight shift kind of things. The other thing about going to UCLA, that was kind of funny because, you know, this learning how to start your own company, all these things that we learned, we got out and said, we don't need to do it that way. We've got our own method of doing that. So, yeah. I do remember one event that I think we learned a lot from. We had been going for about maybe a year and a half, and we all went on vacation at the same time, came back from vacation, and all of our contracts that we thought we had were canceled. So what are we going to do? So finally we developed this 6-week survival plan, much of which we had to lay off people that, you know, we couldn't afford to pay anybody. Grant was one of those. Dick Yamasaki was one. He says, hey, I got these 6 kids. What am I going to do with them? I got to have money coming in. So we focused on this one project that we wanted to acquire with Hughes Aircraft. I think we had started working with them on some of their FLIR products. And lo and behold, by the end of the 6 weeks, we had gotten that contract.
Yeah, I can add a little bit more detail to that, because that was a nightmare for me, I know. It looked like everything was down the drain. And I had been keeping in contact with an engineer by the name of Jack Walden, who was working at Hughes at the time. And he told me about this FLIR system, you know, see in the dark type system. And it turned out that I perceived pretty quickly that we could give them a leg up, because we could, in an integrated circuit form, we could design a lower noise front end than could be realized out of discretes, principally because we could customize the geometry of the transistors to minimize RBB prime. And so when the bomb, it was even worse for me in a sense. It was the summer of '74, and Nixon was meeting his demise, and looked bad for me too, and us in general.
Yeah.
We did come back. All the jobs were canceled, and we were really in bad shape. So I got a hold of Jack, and I said, you know, I've been working with you guys on the side, and I must say that you and my memory tells me that you and Bill and the others were saying, you know, don't waste your time on military stuff. We want to do commercial stuff. But I spent a little bit of time on that, and it paid off, luckily.
Yeah, well, they had the money, and
So,
we had already
so I
gotten
went
our
up
foot
and
in the
told,
door, I guess. So.
I went up and told, or I called and told Jack that, you know, we wouldn't be there by the time the contract they were bidding on would be awarded in January. And I got a phone call probably the next day from, there might have been an intermediate phone call, but I ended up talking to a guy named Bill Craven up there, and whom I had not met before. And I went up, and he asked me some questions, and he called me back and he said, come up. And I went up the next day, and I went up and met with him, and he said, well, I'm going to see what I can do. And a day or two after that, I got a call from him, and he said, we've got a deal for you. They had gone to Howard Hughes himself, who was in his last days, but they had gone to Howard Hughes himself and said, these guys down there can give us a real leg up, but they won't exist the way things are going. And Howard Hughes, I was told, you know, emphatically, authorized out of his personal slush fund the money that we got. And they sent a guy down with a green shade, and he went over our, you know, our books, which I had done a big spreadsheet on a drafting table, I remember. Spent a couple of days going over it and didn't find any mistakes, and certified our overhead rate. And with that, we were off to the races. And we got paid every week out of Howard Hughes's slush fund to work on stuff for them, which you in particular.
We had several follow-on contracts with them as well. And actually, I thought of something else. These contracts, we would make a bid and say, it's going to cost you this much. And they said, no, we got to have, you know, you got to tell us how many hours it's going to take, and we'll pay you by the hour. You know, it was a fixed profit deal. And so I had to make sure that our time cards were filled out correctly to submit to them. And there was probably a little bit of fudging in there, but nonetheless, you have to do.
Be careful what you say.
Anyway, I have maybe just a few highlights in the early on thing here. I know this could take a lot of time. Oh, yes.
So as I recall what happened, pretty much in line, but in my mind, that whole situation was Gene saved the company, okay?
Oh, yeah.
And what happened was Hughes had indicated that they would like us to do some subsequent ships. We had done a design or two for them before. They were really happy with the work that we did, and they had indicated that they might have, you know, some future chips. And so when we came back in August, it was August, we all, you know, everybody went on vacation at SSI at the same time because, you know, one or two people were gone and we didn't have a reasonable staff. So we all went out in August on vacation. We had 3 chips that we had lined up that we were going to start when we got back. When we got back, all 3 chips had been canceled. And so what Gene said exactly happened. You know, we sat down and came up with the survival plan. Okay, so Gene goes to Hughes and tells them that, you know, we may not be, that we, you know, really need some chips and that we might not survive if they don't come along. So what they did was they gave us first a study contract. And the study contract was because they weren't ready to give us a spec. They did not have a spec on the chips they wanted us to design. So they gave us a study contract where they paid us just consulting fees to go ahead and develop the specs, and they gave us, we did five different chips in this FLIR family and arena, and we started off, and the rest of it is, pretty much what they said. But basically, when you talk about hitting a barrier, you were talking about your grandsons and the lesson to be learned, hitting that barrier, it was pretty scary. Because basically, the guys who were able basically said, okay, we're going to hang in there for X weeks, I forget what the number was, but with no pay, and see what we can do. And Gene went off and he made it happen. It really was an amazing experience.
Well, I can say too that for me personally, it was even worse because I had been awarded some nice stock options from SDS, and but I had borrowed money against them to buy the house down in Orange County, to put money into starting the company, to live off of, because I wasn't taking any salary. And during that very week that we went off, the market crashed, and I had borrowed against the stock because people complain today, but in those days, as I recall, the tax rate on long-term capital gains was 50%, and the capital gains on otherwise, and that was determined if you had to hold it 3 years. And if you held it less than 3 years, it was 70%, I believe. So the numbers were very high, and it was a big difference if you held it for 3 years. So I had been holding it for the 3 years, and it plunged. Xerox stock in particular went from 150, 170, something like that, down to 80 something, I think, in a week. And so the bank couldn't find me, so they sold my stock out at a loss. And so when I came back, I had a negative net worth. I owed the bank money against the stock, which no longer existed. So I personally was in hot water, besides the company being in hot water.
I had a similar experience. I had some SDS stock. That's why I remember the numbers. It was it was 170 when it went off the cliff. I did exactly the same thing. I was, trying to hold it so that I could get. It went from ordinary income to capital gains after the holding period. So we were trying to hold on so it would be a capital gains, much lower tax rate. And I didn't have nearly as much stock as Gene had, but the pain was just as much. And so I sold mine at 92, I remember. Finally, I pulled, on mine. I had not borrowed against mine. Okay. Because you paid me a salary. I didn't have to, in the beginning anyway. I didn't have to do that. But it was, my family had just moved down. We had just bought a new house. In January of that year, we had moved in, and here's August coming around, and all of a sudden, things are looking fairly bleak. But it was great. And, Dick, I remember, let me say one more thing. The greatest thing, Gene did some really great things for the company and making it successful. And saving the company that August and, making things happen where we survived was one of them. But the most important thing that he did was his ability to communicate with and gain, and connect with really smart technical people, a lot of whom are in this room. And he never once would lower his standards about what it takes to hire someone. when we brought someone on board, you know, they were talked to by several people, and their capability, their technical capability was, you know, number one. And he assembled a team of people that, you know, I think is beyond compare. And that's what made things happen. And it was that approach and that attitude. He didn't do everything right, but I won't go into the wrong stuff. But the standards that he set and maintained were I think the things that made the company, was one key element of making the company successful.
Well, along that line, I remember that time quite well, and I remember the one key person for that effort was a man named Dick Yamasaki, who was
right.
technically superior when it came to analog chips. And I don't know how many of us had analog chips. I had never done an analog chip in my life, but Dick had a 2-day or 3-day crash course at SSI to turn digital chip designers into analog chip designers. And he was a consultant during the time as we worked on it, and my chip was one of the ones that wasn't a work first time on that particular go-around. But kudos to Dick for his ability to teach us that, and his ability to go on and do all kinds of analog stuff for a company called Silicon Systems.
I don't want to hog this thing, but I totally agree with what Ed said. There were some really top guys, and obviously Dick was at the top of the pyramid when it came to technical capability. And there's another thing. Gene pursued Dick and getting him to come to the company, and finally got him there. Then we had the August fiasco. Dick had to leave because he had, as Gene said, he had 6 kids that he had to feed.
And a wife.
And a wife. Well, Lynn could have made it. Lynn could have made it. So when after Dick left, and we finally got back on track, then Gene started all over again, recruiting, and I can't remember how long it took, but it took quite a while before we were able to, you know, get Dick to come back into the company. And Dick absolutely was a company maker. He really was outstanding. And I'll tell you, another guy who was a huge contributor, and I learned a lot from, was Ed Bernard.
Let me interrupt. Dick's wife, Lynn, is right out here. Could I get you to say a couple words, please, Lynn? From Dick and your viewpoint?
You got me in tears.
Here, sit right here.
It's going to be, I hope I don't stumble too much because I'm not used to talking in front of people, just in front of kids. If you guys all go to...
Well, when you see this on national TV,
Okay.
This is Lynn Yamasaki.
First of all, I want to thank you, Gene, for having me here and calling me. I appreciated that so much. But what I do want to say is I know Dick, he just admired Gene so much. He always said that Gene was the smart, Dick never said anybody was smart. And there are 2 people that he said that were way above his level. He said that Gene Potter was the smartest, and he was honest. And that was one of the reasons he came to, because he felt you were an honest person. And he had a hard time making this decision, the decision to come, because, you know, we did have a family. There was TRW and, you know, security and all that. So finally, he made the decision, and I'm so glad, because I know that's the right decision. But to me, it's a God's gift, having this brain. I always told him that. I said, thank God for the brain that you have, because it's a gift. It's not used. So Anyway, Gene, I just want to just say thank you for pulling him on board with you and all you guys. They're just great guys. You really, he did. He admired all of you, and we just enjoyed being with all of you too. Thank
He
you.
contributed an enormous amount. When you had me speak at his funeral, I remember I had gotten people to add up the total value, the sales price of all the integrated circuits that Silicon Systems had sold, which had been designed by Dick. And of course, that went far beyond the time I was out of the company. But it seems to me the number was a little over $1.5 billion.
Well,
Could be.
I mean, it's...
well, I have to say one thing about one day he invited me, he called, and he was down here working. He says, Lynn, he says, do you want to come down and come to a chip party? And I thought, I'm not going down all the way to Orange County to have potato chips. And that's when I learned what a chip was. So it took me a while longer to get aboard.
Well,
God, do you remember that cake, Gene? That was shaped like a chip, that was frosted in that silver color? You remember that, Rona?
Yeah, I do remember it.
Don't probe the chip, we said. And we had champagne, my God. We had bottles and bottles and bottles of champagne. It was incredible.
did I approve that?
You're the one who instigated.
Well, certainly Dick was, par excellence. I don't know anybody ever in my life that could beat him. We've got one other guy sitting right next to Jim Kellis, who's right up there too, and doing that sort of thing. And that was my goal. I felt in being the CEO of the company that my number one goal was finding the right people, recruiting them, empowering them, and retaining them, and that the rest would take care of itself. Once, very early, I think it was Bob Kleist from Printronics took me on a tour of his big factory making printers on a Sunday. And he was pointing out all this equipment and this huge barrier and that sort of thing. And all of a sudden he stopped and he said, "What do you see?" And I couldn't figure out what he was driving at. And I said, "What do you mean?" And he says, what you see is nothing is happening without the people. And it really stuck with me that the people make all the difference in the world. So I did put a lot of effort into that, and eventually we kind of zeroed in on recruiting basically only people from UC Berkeley, and worked with Dave Hodges up there, and with Carver Mead at Caltech, and we did small favors for these guys, and in turn we got people that were great. And maybe this will lead to another train of conversation here, but I remember going up one time to socialize with Dave Hodges up at Berkeley, and he introduced me to a graduate student who was working on a thesis on a concept. Dave said, "You might be interested in this." And it turned out that the concept was switched capacitor filters. And boy, did I like that idea when I saw it. And came back, and somebody here has worked on chips that first use it and so on, so pick it up.
Mr. Burke? Well, you probably spoke with Gordy Jacobs.
Yes.
And we hired him, and he helped us, and we came out with the first touchtone decoder. 1980, made the cover of Electronics magazine. But I gotta say, Gene, every time we interviewed a candidate, if we thought that candidate was someone we wanted to hire, we had to make sure that he would talk to you, because you had the charisma. Somehow he would talk to you and you would convince him that this was the absolute only choice in his career that he should make. And it worked time after time. We got just top-notch people, and you were the closer. And you made it all happen. It was just amazing.
Jim?
I had a little anecdote to tell about Dick Yamasaki and Gene's efforts to rehire him. And shortly after I arrived there, and I had a nice little office, and Dick was scheduled to come down and talk to me about some project I believe I was working on, and so we agreed to meet on a Saturday, and I sat around there for a couple hours and finally discovered, I guess through a phone call, that Dick had a radiator hose problem in Torrance, I guess, and never made it. I'd heard about Dick for a number of years. Dick was already famous in El Segundo. There was a second occasion, I've forgotten why he couldn't make it that Saturday, but finally he came, and by that time we had departmentalized Silicon Systems, and the layout design group had taken over my office, and I moved down to a huge office at the end of the building, and had my throne set up in the center, my desk in the center of the of the office, and finally Dick came. I got to visit with Dick, and Dick was convinced that Gene could actually help support his children, and poor Dick, we moved a desk into my big office facing the wall. And that's where Dick lived, and without complaint. He was so content. I mean, all he wanted to do was do his thing, and it didn't matter to him. He was just an all-time company man. I mean, he put up with anything, including me, just to do his thing there. And he became the company expert on the switch capacitor filter, I believe, was probably the first thing that he got it deeply involved in. So anyway, I miss Dick, and I know we all do.
Well, he drove a hard bargain before he finally came back. He made me give up some of my stock to him. I remember that. He was a pretty good negotiator. But I felt like in the end I got the better end of the deal.
Yeah, I think we all do.
The company did. But yeah, on the switch capacitor filter thing too, maybe one of you can pick up on this, but as I recall, I went up to UCLA and somehow recruited a teacher up there to come down and give classes, more or less formal classroom work to teach everybody the basic principles behind all of that and so on. So does anybody remember anything about that?
Z transforms.
Yeah, that was Professor Temis.
Yeah.
Who's now at Oregon State, I think, unless he's retired. But he was Mr. Filters at UCLA, and it was really fun. I mean, Gene, you gave us nothing but the best.
Yeah, we certainly took company time
Those were great
set
classes.
aside to to learn something new.
Yeah.
And there was a time also when the PC came out that as I recall, maybe I needs to be corrected, but it seems to me that that I basically ordered a PC for every engineer in the company and told them in so many words, you figure out what to do with it. And Wolf and Bloom went a step beyond the rest of us. Made a whole company out of the idea.
Say, Gene, I'd just like to add something about the engineers that we hired that had a lot to do with our success, I think. We weren't just hiring chip designers. In fact, a lot of them had not designed it. What they were systems engineers. They knew a lot about systems, and that enabled us to go into the companies that we wanted to do a chip for, to understand their system. And in some cases, I think we understood better than they did and were able to write a spec that could really help them and that we, could realize. So that had a lot to do with the types of engineers that we hired.
Well, the name of the company wasn't
Silicon Systems we wanted to do.
Didn't come about happenstance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So that was
Moore's
our
Law,
goal.
was broadcast in, I think, April of '66 is when Gordon Moore got it written up in a letters to the editor column in Electronics magazine. The reason I kind of know it was in April of '66 was that years later he wanted to have a copy of it. And I thought, damn. And he was willing to pay $50,000 for an original copy.
Yeah.
And I dug through my stuff. I was like 2 weeks off. Because I had to save the issue where there was a cover article was on the RAM chip at SDS. And so I had reprints of that and all that sort of thing, but wasn't worth $50,000.
Yeah.
But in picking the name of the company, I had talked to Gordon Moore about his observation a couple of years before that on one of my visits up there, and was well aware of this progression that was going on. And although at the time when we started SSI, the level of integration was pretty small, the future was systems on a chip. And it dawned on me that would be the right name for the company looking forward in time.
I see Ed Klein joined us here. I'm really, really happy because he had a lot to do with us getting into a market that was just perfect. And that was the hard disk drive chips. And that's, to me, what really caused us to grow rapidly. That was a beautiful niche. We were at the right time at the right place, or right place at the right time. It just incredible. Doing the reverse engineering on the IBM chip.
Can you recall for us how you got us into that, Ed?
And that I was fortunate in more ways than you know. I think that when that first chip came in, we didn't really know what it was. And when Marty finished the schematic, it was open collector, and we still didn't know what it was, although we knew it was out of an IBM Winchester disk. But I had an old friend from the SDS disk group working very nearby, and they had a Winchester, and I went over and we traced the circuit and found the collector resistors and were able to complete the schematic from that. It was like an almost collision that almost didn't happen. And the funny thing was, after all that, a different fellow came in a few weeks later with the same circuit and said, "Can you tell me what's inside this?" And I said, "That's really hard."
We need money.
So that time, well, I think we probably actually made a profit. And I credit Marty for a lot of the original persistence in it. He was quite thorough and enthusiastic about it, the whole thing.
That story is my favorite about SSI.
was going to volunteer my perspective of that one.
Go ahead.
I'm Grant Chateau, and I was one of the first hirees in the company in 1973, and September 26, 1973, exactly.
Yeah.
And I was hired as a technician, and I came to work for SSI. They didn't really have a whole lot for me to do, but I helped Dick Yamasaki with some breadboards, and Mike Morley, which was the technician that had already been there.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember Mike?
Yep.
And one day, Ed Bernard shows up with these pieces of wood, and they had like metal gears on them, but they were probably 8 feet tall. And he starts measuring the wall, and I'm sitting there and just kind of watching this thing, and then I ask him what he's going to do with this. He says, "We're going to mount the camera," and he has this big bellows box camera, about, I think it was a 10 by 10 bellows. And he was talking about mounting it vertically, looking at the floor. And I'm thinking, who would mount a camera looking down? Well, turns out, in preparation for this SSI 101, the IBM chip, Ed was going to bring the chip in from IBM, clip the top off, and he and I were going to proceed to make pictures of this thing. And the day that they brought the IBM chip into the lab, getting ready to clip the top off, Mike Morley disappeared. Because at that point, it wasn't clear what the legal ramifications of that kind of borrowing circuitry was. And Ed and I proceeded to, he up on a step ladder looking at the glass plate, me down there, and he's gone a little left, a little right, no, the other right.
Precision.
And I was the
Before we got into layout.
I was the carriage, and he was the photographer. So we proceeded to take a mosaic of about 6 to 8 parts of this chip, and I took these big glass plates down to, I forget the name of the photo shop on First Street in Santa Ana.
Main photo, maybe.
Main photo.
Maine, you're right.
Yeah.
I took them down there, and we waited a couple of days, and I went and picked them up, and then we brought them back, and Ed and I, on the floor in the lab, put these mosaics together. And there was a chip laying on the floor, and then we proceeded to borrow the circuitry from that.
Okay, let me put this thing into perspective about what was going on for those of you who don't recall what happened. At that point in time, there was a huge business in plug-compatible peripherals going on. And so companies like Memorex and what's that place in Colorado?
STC.
Yes, yeah, Storage Technology. And Storage Technology were making peripheral devices, disk drives, and in this case, disk drives where it was a big box, okay, that could be attached to IBM mainframes. And it was a huge business. And IBM came out with this first drive with the SSI, the equivalent of the SSI 101 on it. And what these companies would do is they would buy the first IBM peripheral, and they would take it apart and reverse engineer it to see what was exactly what was in it. Well, in this case, they came out with this. In this drive was a little IBM module, which actually ended up being a hybrid. There were actually multi-chips, a hybrid circuit in it. And it was that they were trying to figure out what was going on and what that was so that they could reverse engineer and build this. And so Ed described this in his write-up exactly. I mean, I have told this story 100 times. This guy appears at our door one day on Daimler, and he talks to Ed, and he wants to he's looking for someone who can tell them what's in this package, in this chip. And Ed, as he said in his write-up, went to Gene and said, there's this guy who wants, this stuff. And Gene said, nah, we don't do that. So we sent him away. About 3 or 4 or 5 days later, some number of days later, the guy comes back, and we told him, you should go talk to a hybrid company. They might be able to help you. So several days later, the guy comes back. He says, please. And he's talking, this is Ed. This is really Ed's story. He says, please, we have not been successful in being able to, find out what's in there. So Ed went back to Gene, and Gene says, well, okay, make him a price. Get some money out of it. So we did, and then we launched into this autopsy of the chip. So that was the first in a family. So when we took that chip apart and looked at it and came out with the circuit, and we gave them, what they wanted was a report. They wanted an autopsy report on what the circuit was so that they could decide how to reproduce it when they built their box, their drive. And we told them that, if they wanted, we could make them a custom circuit that would do that function. And they agreed. And the original guys that came down were from Memorex. The first guy was a Memorex guy that brought in the chip, but we did get multiple people following up on that. And another brilliant decision, I'm not sure who gets the credit for this, was instead of building a custom circuit for this application, we were going to build an SSI standard circuit. And so what we did was we put together a proposal to several companies for a club. And each of the companies put in some development dollars so that we had enough money to do the development of the 101 chip, to engineer it and build it and so forth. And so that became the company's first standard product. And we had customers, so we were selling it to storage technology, Memorex, and also there were some head arm manufacturers, people who didn't make the disk drives, but who made the arms and the heads that were used in the drive, and that was AMC, I think. They made
AMC.
And Infomag was another one. They were down in San Diego. So they all became customers for this series of chips. And in the next drive, and this was the Winchester, when the Winchester drive from IBM came out, on that box, which was a subsequent box, since we were the ones who, made the 101 and were successful and so forth, when that box came out onto the market, the same guys bought those drives, took them apart. We had guys at our door the next day with chips. Let me just finish. So we had guys at our door the next day with chips for us to look at and to go through the same thing. And that ended up being the SSI 104, which was actually moving head amplifier sitting right on the head, and it turned out to be a gigantic project.
Yeah, 104.
I could flesh that out a little bit. Partly goes back, you said you didn't know who got credit for part of it. Here's Dick Yamasaki again, you know. He insisted that we needed to get into some standard products. So he really twisted both of my arms really hard that, you know, we needed to get into doing some standard chips. And that became part of this whole thing. On the other side, I resisted, you know, vehemently taking money to reverse engineer or do design. And so, you know, I think it was my idea in the end to put it all together that we started this club business. And so the rules for being in the club was that you had to buy on the come a certain number of circuits at a certain price. If we never delivered them, you didn't have to pay us the money. But if we did deliver the chips, you owed us the money. So they were just buying product and we owned the design. You know, we didn't accept any reverse engineering money or design engineering money, NRE type money at all, you know. And furthermore, one of the rules was that when you got your first samples was directly related to when you gave us the first sample chip. So if one company gave it to us this week and another one finally came up with their chip to give it to us 3 weeks later, they would not get their samples till, even though we had them, they wouldn't get them till 3 weeks after the first company did. And that scheme persisted for quite a while through more than one generation of these kind of things. And of course, I remember the time that, you know, much later when we ran into a huge quality control problem on those chips, and got to be on a first name basis with Jesse Owita at Storage Technology and Bob Wilson at Memorex, who would come to our little place on Daimler and visit, pull up in the big limo and so on. I want to know how things were going. I guess I'm mixing up two stories here, because they did come and visit us at Daimler early. The big problem I was talking about was later.
Yeah, it was, that was much later. The story when he came in that limo to SSI is great. So the situation is, this is with the 101, okay? It was really early on. And, you know, here's this company this little tiny company. I mean, we're in like 1,100 square feet of office space, and we're like a dozen guys or something. And here's Memorex. Huh?
Yeah,
the bathroom is outside.
Right.
and then there was that smell from across the street.
So we're planning to do this development and sell them chips, and so the CEO comes down in this limo to investigate us, to learn who we are. And can you imagine, he rolls up into this, we did have a conference room then, we had taken the space across the aisle there, and we did finally have a really nice conference room, but he came in and sat down, and when he left, I thought, man, what is he gonna think? I mean, betting this huge company and this huge development on these half a dozen or a dozen guys sitting in this office, you know, it had to be really a leap of faith. So.
Yeah, what he did next, right, was hire somebody else to do it.
Yeah, they did. In both cases, on the 101 and the 104, they gave designs to some hybrid companies. In the case of the 101, because the IBM chip was a hybrid chip. It had multiple chips in it, and of course, to do a monolithic circuit takes a lot longer to build a mask set, and go through, you know, the whole thing, whereas with hybrids, you can really put something together much faster. But those guys in both situations, the 101 and the 104, they tripped. And we were there first, and our product was absolutely much better. It was a custom targeted design, you know, it was, we just won that one hands down. It was really, you know, the breakthrough product for us.
Well, there's a person who's not here who also, I think, taught Gene something about that he didn't know, maybe as Dick Yamasaki had done, and his name is Jim Meyer. When the 104 came along, I remember them talking about, or I heard the story, that, well, what are we going to charge this group of 7 for the development? The development's going to cost us X dollars. And Jim says, well, you charge them 7X. Not 1X, 7X, because up till then we'd always just paid for the work it cost us. And that always struck me, that and I think he also said, well, you charge what it's worth to the customer, not what it's worth to you to make it. And that additional 6X went a long way to SSI to doing additional things for development, which that always stuck with me at any rate, that it's what they want, not what you, you know.
Well, I learned this business about charge what the customer will bear when I was in high school. I worked for Al's TV, repairing television sets. And of course that was ballsy of me, I guess anyway, because I went in and applied for the job and said I could repair car radios. I'd never repaired a car radio in my life. But he says, well, there's 5 car radios. Start fixing them. I'm going out on service calls. I learned how to repair car radios before he got back, with the help from the original Fugitive band. Yeah. Remember that TV program, The Fugitive? Well, Al had a guy working for him, what was The Fugitive. Took money in cash, didn't have any identification, no car, anything like that. But he helped me learn how to fix car radios and so on. But anyway, I asked Al, I said, you've got these antennas on the wall, and there's no price by them. If a customer comes in and I have to sell them an antenna, how much? He says, well, this one here is $3.50 or something, and that one's $7, and this one's $12 or something. Wasn't half an hour later till a guy comes in and wants to buy an aerial. And Al looks at him, and he looks up at the wall, and he says, this one's $11, and that one's $15, and that one's $25. And the guy takes the $25 aerial, and he leaves. I said, Al, did I misunderstand that you told me there was $3.50 and whatever it was? And he says, look, he says, did you see what that guy was wearing? And I said, no, I didn't pay any attention. He says, well, he had a really nice pair of shoes on and a suit. He's probably a doctor or a lawyer. He says, you charge what the market will bear. That was my first lesson and all that. So, yeah, sometimes I needed to be reminded, I'm sure, but that lesson is pretty universal.
Hey, Gene, I could go on and on about more things, but I got one little fun thing.
Okay.
It's 12:13 p.m.
Does that remind you of anything?
Well,
It's 12:13 p.m.
The voice.
well, we
Anything
did
about
a
the voice?
talking calculator.
Yeah. You remember the talking calculator?
Oh, I remember the talking calculator.
Jim Meyer had this sitting in his garage for I don't know how long. It's actually a talking clock. I don't know that we made that, but it's the same people, okay? And he had it on his bike the other day, and he's riding it. And he said, what in the world is that? It's a talking. Yeah, and so I just wanted everybody to hear that. Remind you of some of the funny products that we did. You know,
There's a calculator over there.
It was especially funny. A lot of, oh, I'm sorry. It was especially funny.
Who did the talking calculator? Ed?
Yeah.
It's on the side table.
Oh, it is the calculator? Yeah. Well, this is one I guess we didn't do, but Jim, I guess, got it from the customer.
What was especially fun is when all of that was being debugged on breadboards and stuff before everything was built. It was just hysterical to walk by people would be working on stuff and you just hear these bizarre voices and things. 'Cause that was way ahead of its time. So a lot of fun.
Yeah.
The thing I remember about the talking calculator was that the Johnny Carson show kept pestering us to show it. They found
really?
out about it and they wanted to show it. And I kept saying, no, we only had one prototype or something. Finally, I knuckled under and loaned it to them. And that SOB never gave it back.
Yeah, it never came back, but I have another one, which no longer talks, I regret to say, that actually had the switch on it that you could turn off the speech, but we rewired that and piggybacked a ROM on it, and it speaks, it's a bilingual talking calculator, or it was. It will speak German and English. That was a very enjoyable chip. And again, it's really been lovely doing a job and work that you like. If you're going to be happy with your wife, you need to be happy at work, and vice versa. We had done lots of chips, and the Hughes connection certainly has been made. And at that time I did that chip, I was also working on a follow-on from the first Hughes, the Savior Hughes batch, which was a digital processor for flare targeting for missiles. And it was wonderful to work on this chip because this chip was for a company called Telesensory Systems Incorporated, which was a spin-off from Stanford, where a professor had a premature daughter in the early 50s, and as they did in the early 50s, they gave premature babies lots of oxygen. And they learned, to their regret, that lots of oxygen causes too fast a growth of blood vessels in the retina, and it causes the premature babies to become permanently blind. So this person had the wherewithal and the guts and the determination, like Gene, to start a company called Telesensory Systems, and they had done a chip which had done various things for the blind, and one of the things they wanted to do was this talking calculator, and they came down and proposed the talking calculator. And the digital part was easy, but I couldn't figure out how to do the D to A on it, and I asked Mike, and he says, well, you use switch capacitors. And of course, that's what I'd used. It wasn't switch capacitors a la the Dave Hodges exactly, and that those were time sequential D to A's, where I just did brute force, got it done. You share voltage on capacitors. It was obvious. It's what every electrical engineer learns, that when you share voltages on share capacitors, they go to a common voltage. But the point was, it was really nice to be working on a chip that wasn't a military kill-em chip. Yeah. It was nice to be doing that. It was also almost a dream chip in that the clock frequency was 13 kilohertz. Where we're usually struggling to try to run at megahertz, we're running 100th as fast. And it was straightforward from a logic standpoint. It just seemed to click, and so it was a nice chip to have gotten my hands on.
The chip along those lines that got me was when the National Radio Astronomy Observatory came to us, and they were building this huge radio telescope, which was really an array of antennas out in Socorro, New Mexico.
Poor bird.
Pardon? Yeah, right. And so what they wanted was, they needed some chips. They were building this big, this telescope was really made up of 27 80-foot antennas that were, picking up radio waves as opposed to, visual. And they had a one-shot deal. They needed 3 chips, very high-speed ECL chips, that in order to do a correlation function, when they brought the signals back from these 27 antennas, they brought all this stuff back, and then they needed to correlate the signal in order to get it right. And I think, Bert, you did the,
There
at
were
least.
2 chips. I think there was, Jim, did you do the other one?
I saw
There was a VLA1 and a VLA2, weren't there?
Yeah, yes, there was. And there were 2 of one and 1 of the other.
Yeah.
But there were 2 different chips.
I'm only claiming credit for one of them.
Okay. But anyway, I was in marketing at that point, and when they came in, I just had this like patriotic, this is a one-time deal. I mean, this is not a company maker. It's not like the disk drive chips or anything like that. But we took that job and we delivered it, and they built that radio telescope, and I have felt great about it, the whole time.
They bought 10,000 pieces or something, didn't they?
35,000 pieces.
Yeah, that was the total buy, yeah, for the two.
One wafer.
So to So Ron said that there was a tendency to hire systems guys, and I guess I was one of them. I had never designed an IC until I came to Silicon Systems. And Ron says, well, we've got two ICs here. You want to design a really fast one or a big one? And I said, I'll go for the speed. And so that VLA1 was my first IC. I think it had 2 flip-flops in it.
We didn't need Chuck for that.
Who did that second chip? Who did the second chip?
Speak up, one at a time.
I just don't remember who did the VLA2, and I can't think of who it was.
I don't remember. Chuck, what was your first chip?
Yeah.
First chip was a little gem for ITT, who had contracted Signetics to do these I2L chips. And this is kind of why I got hired, because this was something Ron didn't want to do. So, and I can't blame him. I2L was actually a hoax perpetrated by IBM. But we did the chips, and then I did a CMOS chip for Hughes, and then other things after that. But yeah, those I2L chips were nightmares. Very bad. It's very bad.
We've talked a lot of chips. We can talk a lot of chips, but there's an event early on at Daimler that I think really should come out at this particular meeting. It involves a mouse. I had come in one morning, and this mouse was running across the floor, and I managed to eliminate the mouse, let's put it that way, being quick of foot. Well, I kicked it over the railing and it fell to its death. Yes. But I later learned that our esteemed head of advanced development didn't like that mouse very much. And I hope I'm telling this right, because I'm hearing this story totally second-handed, that I think he and Ron and Gene were having a company meeting one night, or they were going to have it the next morning early or something. And the mouse was discovered, and so this is Bill Drobish I'm speaking of. And I hope I'm telling this right, Bill.
I don't remember it at all.
Go ahead and tell it. I can make up anything I want about this mouse. Well, it seems that
It was a rat, wasn't it?
No, it was just a mouse. It was just a little mouse. No, a rat would have been scary, but a mouse, well. The mouse was known about, or the mouse made its presence there that evening during the meeting, and because none of us, for a few of us, were there. And Bill was, of course, very concerned about that mouse, because as it turns out, Bill had planned to sleep over in his sleeping bag on the floor that night until the next morning for the meeting, or because this meeting was running late or whatever. But I think it's sort of a non-chip story that really bears telling at any rate. And you don't remember this?
No, I don't. No.
He's afraid of the killer mouse?
Oh, but the mouse story, it's not a mouse story, but I do remember I guess Gene and Ron and Marty were always kind of health conscious, and they would walk around the Daimler Street building. and behind this, there was a railroad track or whatever. We would walk around, and one time, we're going around this corner. I was following him, which I didn't usually do. But there was a squirrel that looked squirrely.
It was a gopher.
A gopher.
A gopher. Okay, it was a gopher. Okay, and it was looking strange. And Marty always has beautiful timing on things. And he just as Ron went around the corner, he said, "Look out, he's coming to get you." And Ron just levitated. and you could see the expression on his face. And then he was halfway up. When he realized he'd been had. That was the best thing, was the expression, not only of fright, and then of like, damn it, he's got me.
This guy, he keeps doing this to me for the last 30 some odd years. I'm so cold.
I remember that incident so clearly. It was perfect. You know, the thing about it was, as we rounded the corner, this gopher was sitting out on the lawn in front of this building. And it was really strange. It was a great big gopher, you know, and he had these big teeth. And, you know, as we're walking by, we're all kind of looking at it, and it's not running or anything. It's strange. It just had this, it just gave you this kind of eerie feeling. So as we got by, I yelled out, "Look out, here he comes!" And that's what, and the reason I do this to Ron is because Ron has the best reaction. It pays off. And thank you, Ron, because for all the enjoyment you've provided me over the years.
We had some good times.
Now, there was the time at Daimler Avenue there when suddenly these criminals were on the run, and
Yeah, we got locked in.
and they had robbed someplace, and the police were chasing them. They ended up parking right in front of the building and went in downstairs, which was the telephone company had this huge warehouse. We had these little offices up there that had been built into the building and they had no use for, so they subleased them or whatever to us. But all of a sudden, you know, somebody said something's going on. I went to the window and some cops yelling, "Get away from the window," and they got guns out there. So, we were all frozen in our offices for a while.
I remember that very incident, and Mike Morley and I forget who was there, but they were all kind of on the floor looking out through the bottom of the glass of the door, and I just came around the corner and I put my head out, "What's going on?" And the policeman had caught his eye, and he put his gun on me, and I pulled back, and the other guys were going, "Get out there, he wants you." Because he didn't know, why someone came back so quickly. I had to go down those steps with my hands in the air and get down there until he realized that I worked up there. But that was pretty scary.
That incident happened the first week that I started at Silicon Valley. Oh my God, what am I getting into? Police were all over the place.
Gene, wasn't there a similar story with you and Wimbrow up in Hale, in the upstairs in Hale?
Yeah, we had just gotten the alarm installed a little while earlier, and Gene and I had gone to dinner, I think, and we're coming back to work to do some stuff, and Martin Harvey was headed out the back. We waved to him as we were coming in, and then came in the front door, and the alarm's going off. And so Gene calls the alarm company and, says, this is Gene, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, well, there's a lot of wind tonight. The alarms are going off everywhere. And, it's, no problem. We got it." And he's like, "This is ridiculous. This alarm company, they said no matter what I did when I called, they're going to roll the cops. This is ridiculous. I don't think they're following through on anything." And I talked to him a lot. We were supposed to get, these fancy fire detection things up in the attic. I bet they didn't do that either. So we walk in and we go up into the attic and we're walking around, and then we hear the doorbell go off as the front door had a little bell. And so Gene and I are coming back down, and just as he gets around the corner, there's this freeze! And there's a cop with a shotgun leveled at his head, and another one with a pistol leveled at his head.
And I froze.
Yeah. So it was pretty exciting.
Well,
So
Mike, of course, he was safe back around the corner.
Yeah.
But he had to come out too, you know. So we go down, man, they're on us with their firepower. And I had to identify, each of us had to identify ourselves. I always said, well, my ID's in the car, you know. Well, he took me out, and left arm behind your back, carefully reach in, you know, with 2 fingers or something, and get your wallet out of your coat. And eventually we proved that we were there legitimately and so on. But, and then we started talking with them. And the guy with the pistol, when he was pointing at me, I was really scared because it was just bouncing around like that, literally. And it turned out the night before, that night, he was out with his partner investigating a silent alarm in a warehouse, and the bad guys got the drop on him and shot and killed his partner the night before.
Understandable.
And my attitude towards cops did a 180 after that. How he was back working the next day is beyond me.
Yeah.
But do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So how about the fire alarms in the attic? Were they there?
Yeah,
They were there, yeah. Yeah, it turned out in hindsight that the guy was busy talking to Gene, keep him on the phone long enough to get the cops rolled out there to get him there. He was doing exactly what he had.
Yeah, the rule was that if you re-entered a building within 5 minutes after locking it down, the assumption was somebody put a gun in your side and made you go back in. And so they came out on that, but they never explained that. We didn't know that until after the fact.
I don't know if this is fair territory, but your run-in with the police as a teenager or is an outstanding story. These cops didn't know who they were facing. One of the Potter boys. You want to tell that story?
Well, it doesn't have anything to do with Silicon
It doesn't
Systems,
have
but-
anything to do with, but it has to do with Gene Potter.
Yeah. Well.
Do your grandchildren know this story?
Yeah. They've heard it. When I was in high school, I got very interested in hopping up cars, and so I had bought a 1950 Ford, and first thing I learned was it had been a terrible head-on accident, and the frame was the support piece under the engine that held the A-frames for the wheels and the engine mounts and so on, was split right down the middle, a 1/4-inch crack all the way through. The only thing holding the front end of the car together side to side was the motor and the motor mounts. And so I had spent my money, but I found a car that had been at a junkyard that had been in a fire, and I was able to buy the frame out of that car for $40. And I had a Labor Day weekend, so I was able to start work replacing the frame in the car Friday night at 5 o'clock. And by myself, I completely took the car apart and put the new frame in and had it back on the road running by Monday evening. I had 3 days to do that. So I learned a lot about cars, taking that one apart and putting it back together. And then I hopped it up. And my brother, meanwhile, bought a new 56 Ford overhead cam, and he kept claiming it was faster. So one day we decided to settle that argument, and we had a little drag race along the Hawthorne Airport out there. Nice long street, with no cross streets because of the airport on one side. And I probably was going about 105 or something like that, way out ahead of him, when suddenly appeared a black and white coming the other way. And so I just took the foot off the gas and started slowing down, and he's right behind me, honking and waving in the window to run. And so I ran. And I remember distinctly the whole thing, really. First side street into, the airport's over here, and so the opposite side was residential. Turned into a side street, turned right, turned into an alley, and parked in somebody's open, carport for their apartment, and hid. And then I kept hearing these sirens. I think, oh God, it's my brother. The sirens would come and go and come and go. Finally, it was quiet for quite a while. So I ventured out. I had a passenger with me. We ventured out and started trying to weave way through side streets and avoid going on a main street, when suddenly I saw this big crowd of people in this side street from curb to curb. I thought, oh God, my brother's run over somebody or something horrible's happened. So we stopped, and the passenger and I went up, and sure enough, it was my brother, but the car looked okay. But we left, and I went home. And dinner time came, and my mother said, where's Tommy? I said, he might be late tonight. I don't think we should hold up dinner for him. So we ate. And the meal was just over when the phone rang. Now, mind you, we had one phone in the house. It was an old phone, sat on a pedestal with a mic up here and the receiver on the cradle on the side, and it was in the living room. And I remember I dashed in there, and I said, I'll get it. I go in there and pick it up, and this voice says, is this, I had a nickname then, Barry. My middle name is Barrick, and not Barack, Barrick. And it says, is Barry there? And I said, speaking. And he says, this is Sergeant Cummings of the Hawthorne Police Department. We have a warrant for your arrest. Are you coming down, or do I have to come and get you? I said, I'll be right there. So I drove down, and they took everything out of my pockets, my pocket knife and everything, my belt, my 78 cents in change I had, and so on, whatever. And I had to hold my pants up. I remember that. A big problem, because it was the fad was loose-fitting Levi's. So instead of them going down around my knees, I had to hold my pants up all the time. I walked around, and so they took me in and put me in the cell with my brother. We were in cell number 2. Cell number 1 was vacant, and cell number 3 was vacant, and it was just the two of us. He was pretty quiet, because he had cracked under pressure, revealing me. And so we sat there and whispered, well, what'd you say, and what'd you say, and blah, 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 We cooked up this story that we weren't drag racing, that I was simply checking out a new ignition, and he was following behind. Then we heard, after a while, the policeman out there arguing. The chief of police was saying, well, tomorrow you're going to have to declare whether they were drag racing or not. You can't say you're not sure. And finally, they decided to give up on the drag racing charge, but they had a few others. And so then they came back and said that we had one phone call. And so I was elected to make the phone call. So I called home, and my mother answered the phone. I said, Mother, is Dad there? She says, well, no. And I said, well, Tommy and I are in a little bit of trouble. And she says, well, what kind of trouble? And I said, we're in jail. But you have Dad come down and get my car, otherwise they're going to impound it, and it's going to cost me a lot of money. Okay, I'll tell him. And so time went by, and eventually we heard my father out there talking to the policeman and listening as well as we could. And finally got to the point that he didn't say anything more, and finally some cop says to him, or are you going to bail them out? And I'll never forget those words. Hell no, he said. They got themselves in this trouble, they can just get themselves out. So there we were in jail, and a light bulb stayed on all night. No covers, cold in there. It was not a pleasant experience. The next morning, about 6:30 in the morning, they bring us this leftover breakfast from 2 days ago. 2 pancakes and a syrup and a half-fried egg on top. It was cold as ice and awful, and so I didn't eat any of that. And then all of a sudden, they came in around 9 in the morning and said, "Come with us." And they put us in a patrol car, took us over to Inglewood. Well, there was the first stroke of luck, is they didn't have their own court system for the city of Hawthorne, so they rented some space from the city of Inglewood 1 day a week, which happened to be the next day. Otherwise, we'd have been in there all week until the time came up, and put us in a holding cell. And there's, there were criminals in that room. They were ugly-looking people. And finally, all of a sudden, this door just magically opens out of what I thought was just a plain wall. And they called our names, and so we go through the door, and there we were, in front of the judge. Seemed like he was a story and a half up, way up. That's my recollection. It was just really high up. I'm holding my pants up. And he's going through all these papers, and he looked down and go through more and more pages, and look down, not saying a word. And finally he said, "Boys, I'm going to read off these charges to you, and you're to plead guilty or not guilty individually for each charge." So the first charge was running 17 boulevard stop signs or something. It turned out what had happened was my brother was a pretty good driver, probably still is, and he had ditched the first Hawthorne cop that got on his tail, and somehow in an ensuing thing he had ditched 2 different Hawthorne police, 2 different sheriffs, a motorcycle cop, and a highway patrol. And his brakes had gotten so hot that he pulled over to let his brakes cool. And there was an old couple in the house who called the police and said, "There's some suspicious kids parked in front of our house." And they came and got him. So anyway, we had all these long lists of charges. And so he starts reading them off, and guilty, guilty, guilty all the way through. The last one being reckless driving. And so I pleaded guilty to all of them. I hadn't done any of those other things except the reckless driving, but I didn't have enough wits to say, charge me separately or something. And so there we were. So the judge looks down and he says, I don't remember his exact words, but it boiled down to, "Do you have any last words?" And I remember saying, "No," and just waiting for the axe to fall. And suddenly one of the Hawthorne policemen stands up and says, "Your Honor, may I approach the bench?" What does that mean, And he says yes, and he walks up and he said, "We've checked up, and these boys, is the first ticket either one of them's ever had. They're both going to college and doing well, and we urge leniency and or recommend leniency, and we recommend that they be able to pay the fine on the installment plan," which was really lucky for us. So he suspended the sentence on all of them but the reckless driving, and I think we got fined $50 a piece on that or something, and suspended our licenses for 90 days or something like that. So we didn't have to have any money then to get out of jail that day, and so we walked from Inglewood home, and my brother started going in. I paid my $10 a month, but he started going in. He volunteered right away to go make the payments. So that went along until June. and the payment was due, and it turned out he had a final that day, and he asked me if I'd go make the payment. And I said, okay. And I went over to Inglewood and looked around, and found a place for traffic tickets. You know, it's an old courthouse of that oak, pretty nicely, you know, oak and, you know, glass that's sandblasted, like, you know, and names and all this in gold letters above each window. So there's one there for traffic citations, and I stood in quite a long line. There was nobody at the other windows. And finally got up there to be my turn, and I explained I was here to make the last payment on these 2 tickets. And she looks and looks and looks. And then she says, oh, she says, and her voice went up about, 100 dB. She says, you're at the wrong window. You should be over at the window that says criminals. Meanwhile, the line behind me backed up smartly about 3 paces. So I go over to that window, and then she walks over to that window. And I made the payment. I didn't have another, speeding violation for about 40 years after that. Well, not that long, but I think I only ever got one other one my whole life, actually. But that was my, I learned some lessons.
Yeah.
Don't count on my father.
I have a comment to add here. Not too many of you will probably remember this, but $50 was covered tuition and fees for a whole semester at UCLA.
I was thinking the same thing.
So that was not an insignificant amount of money. All right.
Okay, I think, should we be taking a break now? Is it all right if we take a break and you guys can get fueled up for more of this discussion? When we first decided to start this company, Ron and Bill and I had numerous discussions about what kind of a company we were starting and what would be our strategy to ensure some kind of success. And certainly in my mind, the strategy was that we were going to develop better circuit simulation programs than anybody else had. This would give us a leg up on getting designs to work the way you wanted them to the first time around. And associated with that was layout checking programs, because the rules for laying out integrated circuits are rather complex. And if you just use a brute force, you'll have 2 or 3 guys look at some layout to see if they find anything wrong. There's so many potential errors that they're not going to catch them all. You needed something automated. And so forming what later became known as the Advanced Development Department was, in my mind, was crucial to the long-term success of the company. That we could be sort of a follower in processing. We could buy, when the time came, used equipment, so to speak, equipment, copying processes that are a couple of years old or something, more mature, equipment's settled down, the bugs are out of it to a large degree, but we would have this design capability where everything worked the first time. And we kind of proved that out in the very beginning by doing those RAM chip designs for Signetics. And they worked the first time. And we proved it, that Ron could deliver what I said we could deliver.
Had a few problems.
With Bill's support and help.
Yeah.
And so if I could get Bill and the others in the Advanced Development Department to talk a little bit about what their strategy was and what they had to overcome and how they did it, I think that would be a nice part of the record here.
Well, actually a little bit off point, but one of the first programs I remember having written was there was no such thing as a spreadsheet. And Gene, as we all know, is a very exacting in detail and a very much of a what-if analysis kind of person. And so we'd have a particular scenario, and what did that mean financially, then another scenario, and what did that mean, and it kept going on and on. There were no spreadsheet programs, so we basically wrote a Fortran program that did the function of a spreadsheet so that we could take all of Gene's changes and put them in and respond to what that meant financially to the company. And so that was a precursor of the spreadsheet programs, I guess. Talking some over lunch too, and it's interesting that when we started out, it was very much a proprietary process was competitive, proprietary software, development software was a competitive advantage to it. And as you say, that was one of the things that we focused on, which is probably unique at that point in time, and doing some of the programs that allowed us to do that. And certainly Mike Wimbrow was very much involved in that, as being both a circuit designer and doing some of the software, not to mention the memory repair on the interdata machines, as I remember too.
Yeah, that certainly is a little anecdote that I always remembered, being told one day that the Perkinelma computer was down, and by the time I got around to calling, as I recall, the time I got around to calling to get it repaired and went back to tell Mike, and well, there'll be somebody out, he's saying, well, actually it's already fixed. How he sat down with no, as I recall, little or no documentation, and figured out what was wrong and drove down the street to some wholesale electronic place and bought the IC that needed to be replaced and put it in and had it up and running again. I was like, yeah, Carver's sending me pretty good guns.
Oh, that was, I mean, it was part of the can-do attitude, and partly that, partly not knowing that you weren't supposed to do that sort of thing. Yeah. That you just kind of, okay, well, it's broken, and my deadline's not getting extended by anything, so got to get the computer going again. So, so we did whatever we needed to do, and it was a lot of fun. We had a couple of anecdotes that I haven't actually mentioned to you before, but I started right out of school. So Gene hired me from Caltech, and Carver Mead gave me a great recommendation, which was mainly because my grades were so bad I couldn't get a job most other places. So I had this choice of either going to back east where I grew up and had a girlfriend from college or from high school waiting for me, or stay out here with Gene and this group of new folks out here. So in trying to decide, I'm like, okay, well the other option was with RCA's research laboratory, big company, presumably stable. So I asked my dad for what should I look at, and he's like, well, if it's a bunch of engineers, one of the things you have to look out for is make sure there's a good bean counter around there, somebody who's keeping track of the dollars. And so I go in armed for this interview. I don't know anything about bean counters, and so talk to people, ask who's the financial guy. And, oh, Curly is. So I talked to Curly and asked him questions about his background, and he's done all sorts of real estate stuff and all that. So I'm like, okay, we got that covered. They got a guy here who's on top of it. So then I come to work, and about 6 weeks later, whatever is the August time when everything goes to hell. And by then I found out my dad asked, what happened to this bean counter? What did he say? Well, it turns out that's Gene's father-in-law, and when he's not counting beans, he's making pads of paper out of our scrap newspaper, or our scrap printer paper. Then we all had to use the backside of the computer paper.
Use no time card, no pay.
Yeah, no time card, no pay, yes. So, anyway, but it was,
there was a culture.
Yes,
a clash
there was a
of sorts. Well, Curly's was enlisted in the Marines before World War II broke out, shortly before. So, of course, when it broke out, anybody who'd been in a week was promoted. So those people that got in at the earliest just shot up high, and so he got a pretty good position, and he was comptroller of El Toro Marine Base for a number of years, that sort of thing. But he was a product of the Great Depression, and making tablets out of all that stuff made eminent sense to him. But his perennial complaint to me was, "Where's Lynn out there?" He would say, "That Dick Yamasaki guy," he says, "he just sits there with his feet up on the desk, smoking his cigarettes, and he's not doing anything." Why are you paying him to sit there and do nothing? I had to try to explain to him that he was Mozart, which he literally was, because he would sit there and figure it out all in his head. And when it was all done in his head, he would just pull his feet down and start writing out the most perfect notes you've ever seen for a design. First time through, not one crossed out thing, not one eraser or anything. You guys, some of you have seen some of his notes. They were perfect. And of course, the stuff always worked the first time, although he usually said, "Well, here it is, but I don't know if it'll work." Something to that effect. But Curly had a long time getting adjusted to Dick. And then in the end, he was his biggest supporter or whatever like that. He did come around to appreciate that he was a great engineer. And of course, some of the stories I could tell about Dick don't even have anything to do with Silicon Systems. In an earlier time, I realized I knew a bunch of guys who could put together a state-of-the-art step and repeat machine. That they had a couple of guys who were great lens designers and this and that and the other thing. And I got them all together and said, you could start a great company here. I know the spec for a step and repeat machine. If you can meet that spec, the world will beat a path to your door. And so they went ahead and developed a machine, took it to TI. TI loved it, except that they had political fighting going on inside, so they ended up just buying lenses. But they were paying them $250,000 a piece for lenses. They had such a good lens. But he needed a laser interferometer controlled, air bearing table, stuff like this. He conceived the whole thing, designed the whole thing, all on his own, with nobody to ever coach him or give him one idea how to do all that. And I remember going over the first time they fired it up, and everything worked perfectly. It was amazing, sort of done in the garage. So, but that was the kind of thing it seemed to me I saw a lot of these things from Dick, but everybody else here, every other engineer we had seemed like came in and contributed his mark on things, learned and fitted in, and just kept making the place grow and build its reputation. Seems to me in the May 1981 issue of Inc. magazine that SSI at that point was rated as the 25th fastest growing company in the United States. And that I believe every year that I was ever there with the company that it made a profit. and that it was monotonically growing. Every year made more profit than the year before. And that the compounded growth rate for the first 10 years was right around 100%, which is pretty remarkable. I know Bill and Ron and I hammered out a 5-year plan way at the beginning, before we started doing anything. And 5 years came and went, and Bill pulled out the document, and we were within 5% of our goal for 5 years, which is, for a startup thing and a whole new kind of industry and all the obstacles we had to overcome, is really a remarkable achievement. But we just took it for granted that we could do that. We never thought about losing or failing. My only problem was going out trying to find tougher jobs for these guys all the time. We weaved together opportunity. We kind of began to prove ourselves as being capable of manufacturing the ICs. I think with the chip for my brother was about the first one that we did that way. And so sometimes it was personal connections and opportunities, and other cases like the Memorex and storage technology, they couldn't find anybody else that could do as well as we could do, so they were kind of stuck with us.
The next door company.
So there came a time when we ran into a serious manufacturing problem in Manila. Making the read-write chips, fundamentally they were in flat pack kind of packages, and it turned out that when you assemble an integrated circuit, at least in those days, you took the die and heated it up with a gold preform and brazed it in, or if you will, to the bottom of the case. And in so doing, you could leave a little bit of debris left over from that. And if that debris were to come loose in the package, the circuit's mounted on the read-write arm, the disk, which is constantly jerking in and out, so the debris could be flying around in there, and eventually it could hit the little bonding wires enough times to just eat them in half, and circuit would fail. And we weren't aware of this type of a failure mechanism until it reared its ugly head and shut down storage technology and Memorex and us. And we had to shut down our whole production in the Philippines and figure out a solution to the problem and reorganize the manufacturing and do all that. And it was at that point in time on a trip that I made over there that I met Jill, who worked for Intel, and somehow sweet talked her into ultimately coming to work for SSI and brought a huge amount of know-how and played a huge role in helping to get that problem under control. Plus work being done back here, stateside at the same time. So can I get you to talk about it?
Yes. You don't. He fired me first before he hired me.
You start again on that? What happened?
I said he doesn't remember it well, but he fired me first before he hired me. I think Marty will remember that he was so upset with the performance of the SSI line that he said, "I think you should be fired." And I said, "Well, go ahead and fire me." That's when Marty Grande was standing there, and she said, "Do you know who you're talking to?" I said, "I don't." He said, "He's the president of SSI." And I looked and he said, "Well, okay, then he can fire me, but he will have to give me another job." Because I was working for the packaging company that was doing exactly what he described, the 104 flat pack. Now, do you remember? You did fire me.
I know, I deny that.
But because he fired me, I gave him the best gift, which is I said, move your product from Manila to Hong Kong. They will do a better job for you. That's when he decided to rehire me. But that is not the end of it. As usual, you've heard everybody say Gene is the expert on most things. He described to you what the problem was with the 104 package. So he spent about 2 hours teaching me how to build it right. And he had drawn it on pieces of paper, and I still have those. And I will sell them on eBay.
As an example of something that worked, or?
Something that would have worked if I had just followed your advice. And that's it. After that, I came to work here and continued on with the packaging engineering work for most of the guys, including the 201s and the 141s.
Yeah, in the end, we managed to get you a green card and
Yes,
bring your family here.
My family is here because of Gene. Thank you.
But Jill always exhibited to me this passion for doing it right. And that was kind of characteristic, of everybody. If you're going to do it right. No cheap shortcuts. Well, Scott, that was a big hassle. Any other insights into that trauma we went through would be a good time to put it out here.
Well, I don't remember that specific one, but there was the great problem with die attach when we were at the Hale building, where only like about half of the die would be attached to the bottom, and if you did the chip-off test, most of them or many of them would fail, which ran for, 3 or 4 months before it was finally enough feedback got back to the packaging firm to properly sort it out. But I think that was a later time from the particulate problem. So packaging's important. Could I take us back to advanced development
Please.
A little bit? For the people that joined 2 years after, maybe in '76, they won't know about what we went through to get a die digitized, and so a plot could be made and sent back, and we could look at the plot and see whether or not there was where the errors were and correct it. Grant will remember what we did.
Get the little measuring thing out.
Well, we'd measure things, but we'd start up. Somebody would actually draw the piece of circuitry that had to be done on a piece of paper, or actually it was a green stuff with lots of lines. Yeah, it's not really vellum, it's plastic. And then somebody would take, usually Grant or the engineer, would write down in the language that Bill had generated that would ultimately lead to rules checking, would write down on a piece of paper what the coordinates of all the corner points of all these things were on there. And then somebody would get the TI modem out and hook up to Irvine at the Sigma 7 and would enter that into files. And then there was a program called LoRa, which would read those files and tell you what you missed a comma here, or forgot to capitalize that, or you didn't get the polygon closed, or whatever its checking would do, and you get all that sorted out. But then you still didn't have a plot of the thing, and you still couldn't make a chip out of it. So on the Sigma 7, we would write a 9-track magnetic tape, because we needed to send punch cards to Signetics to get there to plot the thing. Ron remembers. Yeah. But the Sigma 7 didn't have a punch card machine, so we would write a 9-track tape on the Sigma 7 and move the 9-track tape over to the PDP-10, which had both a 9-track tape unit and a 7-track tape unit. We would then take the 7-track, we'd write then we specially wrote it on the Sigma 7. We'd take the tape from the one computer to the other computer, convert it from a 9-track tape to a 7-track tape, take the 7-track tape to a company over near where we had our offices, and they would make punch cards, which we would then fly to Signetics And then they would then fly the plots back to us for checking. Or they could make masks, et cetera, and continue that. It was a great advance when we got our first mini computer where we could actually have a 7-track tape on the dang thing, and we didn't have to go through the Sigma 7 and the PDP-10. So 2 of the steps out of the 5 were eliminated in terms of getting plots done. And that actually also worked because it wasn't long, and we were actually writing what we called CalMA tapes, which would go to a CalMA system to generate artwork for chips. So we did what was needed, and we got it done.
Until you dropped the boatload of those codes in the parking lot, and then you had to...
Then you had to have another batch made.
Or try to resequence them in the same order, and it never worked.
Well, there were several times Marty and I flew to Signetics, spent time and go in there at night and check all the plots and at least cut down on the time, but that got old.
And I remember in the LARA program, you had to describe it in a counterclockwise fashion only. It couldn't be in any random order.
Couldn't crisscross, had to go around just once, one full turn, not more than one. Had to be counterclockwise.
And it had to end where you started, and just, midnight sessions for me were great, but that's okay because the bars didn't open until later, so.
But basically, we invented the tools as we needed them along the way to make life easier for ourselves, to reduce errors that we might make, for all those kind of reasons. That having the best tools is, ever since my hot rod days, get the best tools, makes the job easier.
I think one of the things that in hindsight has really helped Silicon Systems was that the 3 key personalities here: Gene with the big vision sides of things, and Bill is a somewhat structured individual in the way he approaches life. And Ron, who Bill would be working on an advanced development and a simulation thing, and Ron would be there with his slide rule, and many of the time he's like, no, unless you can do this, figure it out on the slide rule, you don't understand it. That simulation is that'll get you the last 5%, but if you're not 95% right to begin with, you can simulate forever and you'll never get there. And that he really taught me that, and I still try and keep that going in everything I do these days. So it was that combination of 3 that really described an area which I think the bigger that area is between the 3 poles, and then the better chance you have of being successful. I think that was really a key thing for us. But there was another little story on firing people. I do remember a quick conversation with, and I can't remember there weren't that many conflicts in Silicon Systems that I noticed when in the early days. But there was one with, I can't remember what it was with Marty and Gene, and something was that Marty was supposedly had screwed up, and Marty's saying to Gene, well, what do you want me to do about this? You're going to fire me? And Gene's like, hell no, that's the easy way out. I'm going to make you stay here and fix the problem.
I remember that story, but I don't remember I was in it. I thought that was Bob Noyce.
Talking about the design tools, like Mike, I interviewed right out of school, and I remember coming in, and we're still using punch cards at school and card readers and big computer systems, and I walked in and I spent the first few minutes with Bill, and he's talking about plotting windows and all these different things, and I'm going, I know what a plot is, I know what a window is, but I have no idea what he's talking about. And it was kind of the tools were just, going in and seeing video terminals and all the stuff that we had was just so far ahead of what everybody was teaching, and it's just amazing the tools that we had.
Well, I remember, I can't remember all the earlier plotting, but plotting was a problem. And then Versatech, as I remember, came out with the plotter, electrostatic plotter, right. And we thought, gee, that'd be a great thing to be able to plot stuff out that fast. And we went up and visited them, and that was when they were just coming out with it, and talked to them and said, this is the problem, and this is the layout, and this is what we want to plot out. And they looked at it and the number of rectangles and so on, and said, well, the programming to do that would be about 24 hours for every plot you did. And so we went back and figured out how to do a heap sort, and actually pioneered the use of a electrostatic plotter and to plot stuff out. And they were amazed that we could actually do that.
You mentioned Versatech. I can still, it brings back the smell of the machine, the feel of the paper.
Some of those plots were pretty big. I mean,
yeah, we had to tape them up, do them in strips. And sometimes the feeding wasn't as uniform as it should have been, so the strips didn't quite match, but you had to develop some kind of a calibration procedure to make them match up. But I mean, to give people in the audience some appreciation, I mean, these plots could be several feet by several feet. I mean, square with detail really small, and people sitting out in the middle of them peering down at one little piece or something like that. Sort of like a blueprint for a...
Well, these are fun stories, and I never imagined how we were going to do 5 hours here. We're practically done already, but and I keep thinking up of things. But one of our initial deals, of course, was to get a digitizer tablet. You don't want to have to write down the numbers for every darn coordinate and have to type it in. That's rather foolishness. So we got a digitizer tablet. And the first one was a particular technology that used magnetostrictive wire, which means it was magnetic, sort of. But it would start to get and misbehave, and it wouldn't put the right coordinates out. And so they knew that, and they had this big bar magnet. And this was wide. This was as wide as my arm span, and they had this magnet which you drag down and wipe it across and take it way away from it and do it again. And it usually took 2 people to do this process, to really do it well. Well, one day we're back in there and it's not working, and this is you and I, if you remember. And so we're wiping this magnet over this table, and Curly comes in, and he thought we were doing black magic. I mean, I swear. What are you doing? We're fixing it. We're fixing it. And so we waved it a few more times. That's when it quit, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Do you recall when we used when we did digitize the Myford building? Yeah. I mean, we used the CAD tools to digitize the building, and all of the workers out there, they stopped using the blueprints because the blueprints had that, you'd scratch out a dimension and put in a new dimension. We could just go in and redraw and then plot out and give them a drawing, just within a few minutes of all the correct dimensions, and it was a big hit. But I think that was before there were probably any CAD tools for building stuff. That was pretty early on.
Yeah. One of the stories I remember about the Myford building is, I don't even know who the architect was, but they designed this. Pardon?
Hockenberry.
And so they laid it out. They had the architecture, and they had this executive suite over in one corner, with the walnut paneling and everything else. And just as an indication of the kind of spirit or work environment that Gene promoted, Gene wouldn't have anything to do with an executive suite in a private bathroom, and it was just uniform, the same thing for everybody, and that can't really express that feeling that everybody's making a valuable contribution, and just because I'm the president and CEO doesn't mean I have a private bathroom. That's the kind of spirit that Gene promoted throughout the company, I think. Everybody had the same size office and if you're manager, you had a space that you could meet with the people and so on, but Other than that, it was pretty much standard size offices, standard size cubicles, whatever it was, for everybody, regardless of your particular role there.
And I'm not sure if the word open door policy existed in sort of the corporate culture, but I remember, being able to talk to you about stuff, Gene. I mean, just being able to go in and say, knock on your door and just walk in and start talking.
Right.
And that was really a, first job, so everybody, for me, it was like, oh, all companies are supposed to be like this.
It wasn't like that after I got there. I was scheduling everything. I just want to tell this one story because I'm going to have to leave soon. When I first started working at SSI, I was trained for a half a day by the previous secretary who had been there. And one thing she told me was, well, he's not real good about keeping time on his appointments. So on the side of the doors, there were windows. And when I had scheduled another appointment for Gene, I'd go knock on the window and I'd look at my watch, and he would reluctantly end the meeting. And at one point he came out and he said, Cody, is something wrong with your watch?
Well, one of the things that gets me listening to you guys is, before we got the tools, the layout tools, do you remember what it was like making Mylar drawings and then cutting rubies and taking strips and checking them? That was the epitome of agony. Now, luckily the circuits were relatively simple at that point in time, but the strategy for success that I had was make sure that when you were, normally you would do a design and then you'd get a couple of guys to help you do the checking, because you could go through and check something and find a bunch of errors, and then you think you got them all out, go back and check it again and you'll find some more errors, go back and check it again and you get more errors. It was just excruciating. It's hard to keep, your attention span. So my strategy for success was to make sure that Ed Bernard help you check your drawings, because Ed was the best. He was. You could always do a lot better. But anyway, there were years of agony before we got to the layout. Why did it took you so long?
Well, see, I think what happened is that you pulled me in and had me check them with you.
That's better. Another thing along the line about, president doesn't get his separate bathroom and all that. Every employee at SSI had a stock option. Everybody.
Yes.
Right. So that I think made a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
People wanted the company to be
down
successful.
Every single person.
Yeah.
Without exception.
Without exception.
We followed that same model at Microsim.
We follow that same model now.
Well, and I adopted it because Scientific Data Systems had a similar policy. They didn't give it to everybody,
Right.
but they gave it to quite a few people. And I know when I went to work there, they gave me a, choice. Come straight across the board salary-wise and get 2x stock, or get a 10% raise and get half as much stock. So of course I took the 2x stock and I'll come across at the same salary. And it paid off big time.
Until Xerox.
You held
Until the
on
summer
too
of
long.
'74, yeah. That's when I learned about, after the fact, selling short and things like that. I didn't look into how to protect myself.
Marty, you were talking about the rubylith that they would cut.
Oh, gosh.
We'd do all the digitizing, and then this rubylith would come back, and it's a layered plastic, two-layer plastic sheet, and all the things would have been cut out. All the features have been cut out with a razor blade, and you would have to take a tweezers and lift out all the little pieces, and you had to make sure that you got them all.
Yeah.
And to this day, I haven't told you this. One time One time I went to, and we did him a trans mask down near the airport there.
Yeah.
And remember, there was a lady named Helga.
Oh, yeah.
She helped peel the ruby lith, and we got to the pad mask, and we started to look for the features, and it was blank. There was no cutouts on there, meaning I had messed up and not added the pad feature into the data. And rather than come back and tell you that I'd screwed up and have to redo it and get the whole process, Helga and I went in there with lenses and magnifying glasses and did all the measuring and cut it out on the fly and peeled them off. And
Works on pads, not on emitters.
That's the right layer.
But I didn't want to tell them that I had missed that.
You didn't have one of the cutting tables that did the XY?
No.
Oh, they used to cut
Oh, they cut by hand?
Yeah,
by hand.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
but I mean, they had these
By
tables
hand.
that had XY things, so you could
The
do it
coordinates
all
are
your
off.
Yeah.
parallel and then.
Yeah.
But doing pads by themselves would be too bad.
Yeah.
There are more ways to mess up.
Yeah.
I was going to say, there are more ways to mess up artwork than you can shake
That
a stick
was
at.
7 layers.
And I learned that at Xerox Data Systems, going up to Signetics. If they could cut the alignment marks off on the thing. If there was a way to make a mistake, Signetics could do it, as far as was my conclusion.
There came a point, and some of you guys hopefully can remember the details, but suddenly we procured a scanning electron microscope, which for the size of company we had was pretty much unheard of to go do that, but somehow I became convinced that it would pay off, that we really needed to see some things that could not otherwise be seen, and somehow managed to work the financing to go buy one on time and turn it over to you guys. Who remembers anything about that?
Yeah, I remember about it. What was the kid's name?
Tim Teal.
What?
Tim Teal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he went to
Western Digital.
to what?
To WD.
No. He came out of what's that school that you get a technician kind of a degree. And he was an electron.
DeVry or something?
Yeah, DeVry. Yeah, so he was from DeVry. And we got onto him, and he found us he was an electron microscope expert, and he lined us up with a used electron microscope. And we used that a lot when we ran into trouble with the particle problem. I mean, that was one of the drivers for getting that piece of gear. And there are a couple of things in my memory that where we didn't do it right. In fact, we did it really bad. And one of them was actually before SSI. It was actually I think it became the SSI baptism. In order to come to SSI, you had to work on the prom, on the 501.
Xerox 501.
Xerox 501. So
Come on, Marty, don't.
Huh?
I don't want to hear about it.
You left.
So as you remember,
That's one reason I left.
you left, Ed left, I ended up leaving. We came up, actually Gene came up with, we were going to build this computer at SDS, and we were going to build it out of programmable read-only memories, PROMs. So we were going to implement all of the logic in the computer with that approach. And we needed a very high-speed PROM, so we decided we had to design it ourselves. And this whole thing led to, number one, we decided that reliability was going to be key. We're going to have thousands of these things in the machine. And we were concerned, the way you programmed some of these PROMs at that time was using nichrome fuses. And so Gene came and said, we got to make sure that these nichrome fuses are reliable. And so we set up massive experiments where we had currents going through all different kinds and shapes of nichrome fuses to make sure that they wouldn't wear out. And then just to be complete, he says, we need to blow some fuses and make sure that they don't, nothing happens to those. Well, it turned out that we uncovered a fundamental problem with nichrome fuses, that they healed. If you didn't blow them with enough energy, then they would regrow and reform. And we went to Signetics and TI and Motorola and says, we're finding these results where nichrome is not reliable. And they said, no, that's not true. But eventually they faced up to it. So when we went to design our prom, Gene said, okay, the key thing is to blow these fuses with enough energy. And if we blow it with enough energy, then the healing problem is not a problem. So in order to do that, we had to get enough voltage, so we built our prom out of base collector junctions instead of base emitter junctions. And that basically led to substrate parasitics, which created unbelievable problems. We would design the prom, it would check out, everything would work out. We go to program it, and we programmed to blow this fuse here, and this fuse over here would blow. And there'd be some parasitic path through the substrate that went through. So Gene led the first design team, and when we were done with the prom, we turned it over to manufacturing, and that's when he left to start Silicon Systems. When those circuits came back, Ron was sort of in the, I think you were next. Ron was in the seat, and so he, we had this problem, so he went through and we did a redesign, and we sent it back. Then he left. Then Ed took over.
No, I never had it. It wasn't mine. No.
Weren't you the next one?
I was just helping simulate stuff on it.
Oh, okay. All right.
You had it.
Yeah, no, I had it because I had Gene's job, so I had the responsibility for the prom. In fact, toward the end of that year, I had to go up every day and report on the progress of what we were doing to fix the prom to the chief engineer at SDS. Every day I had to sit down and go through a program review. And I would tell him exactly what we found, the analysis, why we felt we were confident that we had fixed the problem. And, it took like 4 passes. And by the time we got it done, they decided that they were going to slow down the machine. They actually changed the clock rate on the computer and went and used a standard prom. So the design really never got into it. But it was a situation where we created something to fix one problem that developed some new problems because we were forming these substrate structures that created essentially sneak paths. Isolation really wasn't going on when you were hitting these big voltages. So there was sort of a negative, and so then I left after that. And it was, I'll tell you, it was a humbling experience. It was, it really hurt to go through the experience, but I really learned a lot in that some things are really unpredictable. And, your scope of view is not wide enough to really understand that there can be problems outside of it. So, but we analyzed the hell out of that circuit.
Well, I think it made us really try to come up with much better modeling of the parasitics as well as
absolutely.
Circuitry.
Who's got some new angle of attack here to discuss?
I did a flasher, barricade flasher.
Yeah, that was it. The flasher chip. What company?
Royal Flasher.
Royal Flasher.
Royal.
Oh, yeah. How can we forget a name like that?
That was a learning experience.
That was unbelievable.
Turns out that ion implanted resistors vary with time and temperature.
Well, I remember that chip, we were trying to, it had a really tight cost objective. And we were looking at trying to get the area and the topology to a point where it would be achievable in order to make the cost objectives. And there was not a really straightforward. I don't even remember the solution, but I remember that Jim ended up coming up with the layout, with the structure, with
We
the design.
got a patent awarded on that circuit, but it was Ron's idea to do it with one layer of metal, cheapskate. And we used the substrate for ground.
Who would have thought a barricade flasher would have so much technology in it?
And then it didn't work because they couldn't make the light bulb that it needed.
Really?
That's right, yeah, they couldn't make a light bulb that could take the pulsing without burning the filament out. Because of the thermal cycles.
Regulated, ran from a battery, and it regulated the power of the lamp according to the battery voltage. It's a duty cycle, I believe, sort of modulated thing.
Basically the product was a flashing yellow light on barricades along roadwork, and the object was to make the battery last as long as possible, and the boundary conditions were that the flash rate and the intensity of the light had to be held within tight limits. As the battery is decaying through its life.
You wouldn't think the flashing rate would be a critical item, but that was the experience we had with the high resistivity ion implant diffusion, and not a diffusion, an implant, but that it drifted the ions in the process. Signetics, I believe, did it. Ions would drift around there over a few weeks' time, and the frequency wasn't, at the end of the time, was different than what you started with. Heated up, and you got the original frequency back, but cured it with another layer of I guess, layer of metal over the implanted resistor that reduced the field that the things saw.
I believe, I remember that, Jim. The problem was the metal one going over the thin film resistors, and we would, adding the second layer of metal, you would jump up to go over top of the resistors rather than directly over top of them. I remember Ron Driggers working with you on that one.
So you can see that from this discussion that's been rambling on, that there were a myriad of technical problems. Everything had its problems. Everything was a challenge. There were no slam dunk deals. And in parallel with that, and running the company's getting bigger. Each year there's more and more chips designs getting underway, and the turnaround time to get wafers is getting longer and longer, which is biting into our basic modus operandi that we could design something quickly and get prototypes to customers quickly. That was just escaping away from us. It was turning in from weeks to months to get prototypes. So we eventually got to the point where we felt like we had to have our own wafer fab. Maybe not be the state of the art that Intel or any of the other IC houses had, but we could organize it in a way where we could get quick turnaround time. And it became apparent that we couldn't continue growing the company simply on the basis of retained earnings. The amount of money it would take to build a wafer fab, we just couldn't save that much money up out of retained earnings in any reasonable period of time. So while all this other stuff is going on, I'm beginning to see, dark clouds on the horizon and go out and try to find money to build a wafer fab. And that was a project, where to start. I had no idea. To start talking to people and, trying this, trying that, trying the other thing. I started off talking to Max Polewski, former boss at Scientific Data Systems, and that didn't initially lead to anything. And Lord knows how many paths I went down trying to find investors to make a private placement. At one point, I know I went on a wild goose chase to Liechtenstein. There was a potential investor in Liechtenstein that was interested in investing money, so had a wonderful trip, but no results.
Boy, did he make a mistake.
Yeah, I thought that to myself later.
Until
But at any rate, eventually got back to right where it started, talking to Max Polewski. And this time around, he decided to take a look at our situation more seriously. And he sent down Dick Kramlich to take a look. And he was a right-hand man of Art Rock, major venture capitalist. And Dick Kramlich liked what he saw. And so Max came on board and put together a group of private, sophisticated investors for the private placement. So he had lined up Dustin Hoffman and Barbara Streisand and Karen Carpenter and I don't know more. There were more names than that. And they all put in various amounts of money along with Max. And that got us kind of started. And then we decided we needed a lot more money than that. And Max and his contacts decided there was a window kind of opening up for making an IPO. And we put together an innovative approach to doing that, wherein we used a dual underwriting. We used L.F. Rothschild, Lindbergh, and Tobin in New York, along with Robertson, Coleman, Stevens, and Williams in San Francisco, and managed to pull off our first public offering, which is a memento of it right here.
February of '81?
Yeah. And seems to me like a year later, we did another one.
Wasn't Harvey key in getting us positioned with the private placement? And it seems to me
Harvey
that,
was part of the company then.
yeah.
And but Max actually, he knew Sandy Williams.
Sandy.
At Robertson Coleman.
Oh.
Stevens and Williams. He knew Sandy real well, so he had us locked in there. And he knew the guy at L.F. Rothschild well also. So Max really made it happen.
No, I realize that, but I think Harvey was also a key in getting Max committed to the venture. And I believe that we positioned the private placement to be followed by the going public. It was less than a year apart between the two, and I think going in, that was the strategy: a $4 million for private placement, followed by a public offering.
Well, hopefully, but the window did open, and we were able to do that. So while all this engineering work is going on, there's work on other levels going on, and we need a bigger building. At some point here, we got spread out into several buildings, and And there we also took kind of an innovative approach in that we used my in-laws, who were in the real estate sector, to, line up some property and organize the deal where basically all the employees in the company could participate in owning this property. Many of them didn't, but a number were too cautious or whatever, but a number did, and in the long run, I think made some money on that too.
That was one of the best investments I've ever made.
Best real estate investment, yeah.
It made up for all my bad real estate investments. And I don't touch them anymore.
So,
it was great.
But it was another example of trying to bring reward to all the people in the company for their contributions to the company, and not just siphon off to somebody on the outside or something like that.
Well, Gene, that thing got set up when we had seven of us were limited partners, and that was pretty close to the number of employees we had at that point. It was very early on, I think.
Yeah, because we initially, SSI Properties, because we initially did the Hale building.
Yeah, we did the Hale building
when we were in
first.
Daimler, and the same group then leapfrogged to the next one. Yeah.
That would have been
But
76
Gene,
or so.
I understand that Max Belevsky liked oysters. Do you remember telling us about
oysters?
Oysters, that you had to go and eat raw oysters with Max because you wanted to get Max to do these IPOs for you.
Well, it wasn't Max.
Okay.
It was a guy at Hughes Aircraft.
Okay.
To get that Hughes work,
that was the one.
I had to go eat a whole lot of raw oysters, which I did not like. But I had to go out to take him out to dinner after work up at Hughes more than once. He's throwing these things down. I'm gagging on him, but whatever it took.
Okay, if you want a vote of valor, someone who went above and beyond, then I have to nominate Ron. Okay, Ron used to meet with this Korean engineer. I think he was from Hughes. None of us could sit in the room with this guy because he had a huge garlic body odor.
He was my boss for a while. That's okay, keep going.
Anyway, so, we would hear this guy is coming in and we'd all say, oh my God, what are we gonna do? Ron would rise to the occasion. He would sit in a closed, small room for an hour or 2 hours with this guy and get through it. And to me, that was valor above and beyond the call.
I like garlic.
Well, that does bring up another story about Harvey smoking.
Which one is that?
Well, we would have those management meetings, and Harvey would be chain smoking. And it was kind of annoying some of the people in the meeting. So I don't know whose idea it was, and who actually even participated in it, but somehow we went over to the Army-Navy surplus store here in Orange and bought a World War II gas mask. And
I think it was Chuck Austin. He led this whole thing.
Yeah, I had a gas mask. I
He did.
had a canister.
And a gas mask.
And then Grant, we made a miniaturized version. So Grant had a little plastic thing on his nose, which was our transistorized gas.
We had an uprising of employees.
My motorcycle got it.
Had the goggles and all of that. And it was spray painted with dull black paint and all of that. And I took
getting rid of the smoking.
I took the unit in 10 minutes before the meeting, and I typically sat at the end of the long table. So I put it down where nobody would see it. And so the management folks came in, and Harvey came in, and he's lit up smoking, and it certain point while they were chit-chatting, I leaned way down, put this thing on, and I come up with this black gas mask. Everybody in the room was laughing so hard we couldn't continue the meeting for a good 10 minutes, I think. But Harvey got up and moved over under the exhaust vent, and thereafter he always smoked under the exhaust vent so it didn't circulate through the room, and not a word was actually said.
Well, I think soon after that, we had a special room that people could go smoke in.
Yeah.
However, that didn't work because the air conditioning kind of spread it all around anyway. So we finally ended up, you had to go outside to smoke.
Well, eventually we re-plumbed the exhaust.
Well, maybe it was.
To
But it
fix that
still
problem.
wasn't as effective.
I was a smoker at the time, and I wondered what's next. Are we going to set up Alcoholics Anonymous?
Not until Gene stopped drinking.
Well, they did start drug testing. We did. Yeah, hire new people, they got drug tested. That was after the fab. There was some problems in the night shift.
Oh,
fab.
right. That's right.
kind of what started that.
Do you remember that whole thing with the fab? We had to get some undercover people to, it was this huge deal because of stuff going on the graveyard shift, I think it was. With fab people.
What going on?
Drugs, using drugs.
The fab people. Yeah.
Well, earlier we had a problem of suddenly petty cash was starting to turn up missing, and some of the women were suddenly missing cash out of their purses and so on. And I remember a number of people came to me and said, well, it's time to get badges for everybody and a guard, and we got to fess up and operate like a big company. And I objected. So I got Ron Moyer on the side, the facilities guy, and I said, Ron, we got a bad seed in here. I want you to catch them. Go out to some independent detective agency and figure out how you're going to identify this person. I don't want to know anything about it till it's done. It's you and them. Whatever budget you need, you got. And he came back a couple of months later and said, okay, we've identified the culprit. And was a young guy working for the company. It's vaguely in the back of my mind, might have been related to, what was her name, Goff?
Virginia? Virginia?
Virginia Goff. Not her, but somebody connected to her maybe. And at any rate, it was a young guy that had been working for us for a good 5 years. And so I got a hold of the Tustin Police Department and asked them to send their biggest, burliest, meanest policeman over. and the guy came over, and Ron brought the offender into the room with the cop, and I said, well, we know you've been doing this. And first he denied it, and then I said, well, but we have this proof. And so he soon agreed that he was the culprit. And I told him that, I was going to fire him, but not press charges. But the Tustin Police Department was here, obviously, and knew about the incident, and that if he was hauled into their jurisdiction or any other, we got wind that he was gotten any other trouble, we would activate prosecution on this case at the same time then. But he was sort of getting a second chance, and let him go. And I never did hear that he messed up anymore. What I did hear was that his family had fallen on very hard times, and they were literally stealing money for food, which was hard to take, but wasn't the right solution.
Okay, I want to clarify something because I'm not aware of that Virginia was, or someone she knew was involved, but Virginia's son David worked for the company as a young kid, so he kind of fits that thing, and it was not him. It was absolutely not David, because he started working for the company at like 16, 15 or 16.
Teenager.
And he went through, and he worked for Ron Moyer for years, and became a really top guy. He became a direct. I think he ended up at the disk drive guys. But anyway,
I think he was maybe in computer.
IT
support.
IT guy. Yeah, he became an IT guy. So I want to make sure no one comes away with that.
I didn't think it was her, but I don't know where the guy came from exactly.
Yeah, well, it definitely wasn't Dave Goff.
No.
Yeah.
But he'd been with the company for 5 or 6 years.
That all happened on Myford, didn't it? I'm sure that was when we had, because they were, we go out to play volleyball, and that stuff was getting taken from the...
Yeah, you'd have a little less cash each
Yeah.
And with that getting rid of that one guy, all these random things that were going bad just disappeared.
Well, the other thing about bringing up this wafer fab and going public, guess what? We had this piece of paper that said SSI stock, and it was worth something, finally. It was a significant event for a lot of people.
I remember we had that bulletin board outside the kitchen, and it had with the stock price on it every day, and then along with the ski report. Remember mammoth snow levels?
I had some technician that played the market with SSI stock. I don't know. He had some system. I don't know what it was, but he had all the data.
Who did?
Some technician I had. I can't recall.
Well, I remember that I was secretary of the company at that time, and so we did Gene did all the work relative to the road show and all that, but then it came time to go pick up the check, and I imagined some big party going down to do that. And it was me driving down to pick up I think it was a $12 million check. And as it turns out, what you do is you walk across the street to the bank and cash it, so it's not a real big deal. But it was an interesting experience for a young kid.
Struggle to run to Mexico was powerful.
You came back.
It's 3:30, Gene. What do you want to do about wrapping up?
I don't have any set plan or ideas or anything like this. I do want to make sure that everybody here gets to share at least one memorable thing that they remember about the company and their experience at the company. And so I solicit anybody that hasn't done that yet to get it in.
I have a couple. They tie into my short period of time of working on the I2L chipset with Chuck. And I remember at that time you guys were wall to wall with people in no place. And I remember immediately saying, well, that's no problem, I've got a motorhome. And so I drove my motorhome out from Torrance every day and parked it out in front of the Myford operation at the curb. And whenever I needed to use the restroom, I would go inside, and whenever I needed to have some human contact for some purpose other than just chit-chat, because in those days, as Gene knows from our years together, I was always kind of overly focused as he was, and that's probably how we got along, because we worked together without saying too much. And so that was probably my most interesting concentrated experience because I was out in that motorhome writing logic equations and, like proving them myself and doing all this stuff. And then maybe twice a day I would go inside and see humans and put in about a 9-hour day and then drive home. And but I did have something else I wanted to say, and I wanted to wait until sort of the end because a couple of things that Gene hit on having to do, number one, with really believing in something and following something and being willing to pursue it, even if you didn't understand much about what you were pursuing. And then the other comment he made, which was do it right the first time. And that was one of the characteristics that Gene and I shared from the time we met when we were both 18 years of age. And we began to, form study groups, and Gene and I and Marty were one of those study groups. But as Gene as I got to be nothing more than juniors and at UCLA, really wet behind our ears, and we knew nothing about much of anything other than what we were learning moment by moment. But somehow we both got interested in transistor semiconductor technology, and from that point we sort of formed a bond in which we began to study and to listen to what our professors were telling us, and it didn't take either of us very long to figure out these guys knew less than we did. And and then we struggled for many years with the concept of how do you model a transistor in order to do anything that's predictable. And so we began the process of reading just about everything that you can, and little by little we began to unravel some of those early concepts that really were not, it wasn't like you go someplace and this was all there laid out for you, as to how to design a flip-flop so that it's going to work forever, and a line driver and the gate sets, and how do you compare one set versus another. And Gene not did I get interested, but Gene took it like another step beyond, which is he basically began work after he had taken enough graduate credits for a doctorate but couldn't figure out what it was going to be, and he decided to go to work. And then he began to work on his master's degree, basically in the architecture of logic circuits, every one of them that was on the market. And we talked about it a lot, and he did all the work, pirating time over at Nortronics on their IBM. I think it was a 709 at that time. And all with punch cards, and that background and that tenacity is really at the heart of what all this is about, and what created it. So anyway, I want to make that clear that this just didn't start, when he left. When he left Scientific Data Systems, it began a long time before that. We worked together. We discovered a lot of transistor phenomena that wasn't published, and we shared it, and we worked with it. We used it, and it was fantastic. So thanks a lot for the experience.
Well, thank you. I read that biography of Lord Kelvin when I was in about the 5th grade. Somewhere more or less in the book it says if you can't explain something mathematically, you don't yet fully understand it. And that really stuck with me for the rest of my life. And this business of developing models that would give useful and accurate, dependable results was, paramount on my mind. And the people, so that's sort of something that came down from my, I spread that over everybody. But I also spread over everybody, to the best of my ability, to take each individual person and help them to become the most they could become. And as one example of that, Martin Harvey as an example. I mean, I don't remember the details, and you correct me, Martin, but it seems to me there came a point when you and I had a conversation, and although we all loved you as an employee and valued you as an employee, I felt you weren't quite totally in love with the job you were doing. And the long and short of it was that, as I recall, the company paid for you to go through a career counseling evaluation over at UCI, and that it kind of came back that your favorite job would be like a forest ranger. So not exactly working in an IC company. And that we helped you to relocate and move yourself to Grass Valley and get into a career that made you a lot happier. And isn't it funny how years later, in trying to recruit engineers and beginning to realize that not all of them wanted to live in an urban environment, some of them would like to live in a more rural environment, that we came up with the idea of starting the Grass Valley operation, and it became a phenomenal success. Yeah. And you ended up coming back to work for the company while you were living in Grass Valley.
It worked out good. I feel very fortunate that I had the opportunity to go to work for Silicon Systems. It was a great career, and I started out working for Marty in manufacturing, and Marty was kind of the problem solver. There's a need for him in marketing, so he moved over to marketing, and I started reporting to Gene and with the manufacturing stuff. And then marketing problems were solved, and he moved back into manufacturing because we had so much business that we needed somebody in there to help out. And so I ended up working for Marty again. And then I moved up to the Grass Valley area after that. And got into layout design and working for Grant Chateau. And then they needed somebody just to kind of specialize in the tape outs and coordinating wafer fab and assembly. And so that's how I got involved with that. And that was the highlight of my career, because I had engineering experience plus manufacturing experience. And that was the perfect fit for me. And it's been a great career.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think everybody that the company ever hired to work in Grass Valley was retained. Not a single one of them ever voluntarily left. Is that right?
It was a very high statistic that way. Later on, several people left and started their own companies and stayed right there in Grass Valley. You know, George Landsberg and a few of those guys.
But after the company had been...
Yeah, long after.
Pedaled to TDK or whatever.
Yeah. But it had an extremely high retention rate.
And we got good people to go there, boy, that couldn't have gotten otherwise.
We started with 10 of us going up there in 1980, and at one point we had grown that whole facility to several hundred people. And John Huggins had a big group that had gotten split off later on, but it was extremely successful. At one point, all of the chips that were generating revenue for the company had been designed by that group. So,
I remember coming up, twice a year? And, gathering everybody together in the evening and saying how the finances are going, giving you a heads up on the whole company operation. You guys had picked a colorful place to have the meeting, I know. Guy driving his motorcycle into the place. Long Branch Saloon or whatever place it was there over in Nevada City.
Yeah, the Hard Rock Saloon, I think it was.
Yeah, I was kind of jealous of, the environment you had up there. It was It was great. And that was even before internet or something like that. Still, we made it work. The communication, which was thought to be possibly a real problem, just didn't turn out to be a problem as far as I could see.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's surprising how many people that started with that same group are still up there in some fashion. I think at least 6 of the original 10 are still around there.
A lot of it's because of you. I think you assembled brilliance. There are such brilliant people at these tables that I've had the privilege of working with. Half of them, not all. Marty came up to me and said, I'm sorry, I don't know if I remember you. Well, you wouldn't. I actually worked with Gene at the next company. I was 25 when he hired me. And all the things you guys are talking about, drive for excellence, the tenacity, the compassion, the intelligence, and a true compassion. So I know all of you, because I've heard the stories, but I know because you know Gene, that you're all of that same makeup and the things that you do and how compassionate you are. And I was telling Ed, I'm a non-engineer, and to work for engineers in a company where you understand what they're talking about, that is because they care so much about what they're doing, that they have a level that they can then explain it to people at different levels. And it's fantastic. And you assembled those people. You are one of my mentors, along with 2 others sitting there, Bill Drobish and Gary McMullen. I've had the fortunate of having such great people in my life, and it's because of you. So I thank you.
You're welcome. You made your own mark, you superwoman. Nothing slowed you down. If the steel case partitions need to be rearranged, there's Denise with her wrenches and tearing it apart and putting it back together and reorganizing the phone system and whatever it was, you fitted right in.
But you brought that out in so many of us. You really did. So
Well,
many of us.
So I've been so blessed in my life to just be at the right place at the right time with the right people. And I know my own daughters got shortchanged. There's one anecdote where Sherry hadn't seen me for a whole week, and so Friday came and she asked Betty, when I was going to come back from my business trip. Well, I hadn't gone on a business trip. The thing is, I was coming home at 2 o'clock in the morning and leaving at 6 a.m. to go back to work. She hadn't seen me for all that time. And then there's my wife, Betty, still back there. She left? Oh, no, I can tell the story then. Just tell one little story on her. Habitually, I would say I'd be home for dinner at a certain time, and it wouldn't happen. Marty would nail me, and we'd be talking.
Oh, I think Bill and Marty and I and you were in a meeting and kept getting these calls, Gene, you better go home.
So one time she had baked pork chop, was it? And she just left it in the oven. I got home like 2 hours late, and it was solid charcoal. Absolutely solid charcoal. So I had to laugh, and I made a peanut butter sandwich, and that was my dinner. And I forgot about it. And about 3 weeks later, I come home, and in the family room where the desk was where I paid bills, and it's kind of, a miscellaneous room, there's a nice plaque on the wall. The pork chop is mounted in the middle of the plaque with some commemorative words. I won't repeat.
Nicely garnished.
At the bottom, and with the story that the the guy that made it was laughing so hard that he broke several bits just to get the hole through the pork chop to mount it.
Well, to be honest, I sat in many meetings where I would hear the call from home and hear you tell Betty, okay, 6 o'clock was the time, and would come and we'd say, gee, it's
8.
It's 6. No, it was never that long, but it's already 6, and oh yeah, and you would go on. It was the pork chop was earned.
Oh, definitely. The divorce too. That took a little longer. But
we have one question from the crew. What do you think the most significant innovation product that you all worked on?
our most famous product, you mean?
As a company?
Well,
I think the switch capacitive filters.
Huh?
I think.
I'd go with the interior disk drive. Yeah.
Whole disk drive.
It did, but from a product development, the DTMF receiver was an industry milestone. So from a technical viewpoint, yes. From a company builder viewpoint, definitely the disk drive circuits.
Well, and the read-write circuits, basically they led the way. They were superior performance to what they could get elsewhere otherwise, right?
Yeah, in the time available, our circuits were better for many years.
Right.
Like 20 years or something. More
Yeah,
than
about
that.
20.
Yeah.
And I think the number is accurate at a little over $1.5 billion of Dick's designs alone. So
I remember when you did the calculation. I don't remember the exact number, but it was a big number. It was in that order, and it was real. When you look at the fact, if you take it way up into the channels in the 90s, when the high revenues were going, that certainly mounted it. But we in 1989 we hit 100 million, I think, is when TDK came in and bought us. So to get to $1 billion, going from 10 to 100 over 10 years, it had to include the 90s. But it was a huge number. Yamasaki Dick was. I want to tell one story about Dick, if I may. And that was before SSI, when I was working for you at SDS, and we had an IC tester that had problems, and we couldn't figure out what was wrong. This thing would all of a sudden burst into oscillation that was all over the machine at the same time. You couldn't figure out where it was coming from. So Gene calls in Dick, and Dick comes and he gets in front of this machine, he looks at a few things, he's got us putting probes on certain points, he's looking at the schematic and studying it, and we go through and he looks at several points, and then he sits there with his mind going, and he says, okay, I think we need to put an inductor here. And we put the inductor there, fixed the problem. Totally analyzed that whole system in his mind. It was just incredible. It was just unbelievable. The guy was amazing.
One of the things I noticed about our products for the disk drive companies, after a while, one of the most important things began to be quality. Okay? I mean, the customers they say, let's see who's ranked highest in quality, we're going to buy from them this quarter. It just became a huge factor. And when TI acquired us, they didn't understand quality. It was kind of a problem for quite a while. It's just they had a different kind of product line, turned out. But that was sort of amazing to see it just shift so much to quality, reliability. Well, you don't want your disk drives failing, so that was a big factor.
Well, I think we got your question answered. Thank you very much. Thank everybody here for coming. I enjoyed it immensely. And I hope you did too. And we will provide all of you with copies of this.
A great time, just great.
And Gene, I'd like to tell you that the company was all heart. It was all heart. And that's why we're still together after all these years. It's the heart, it's the connection.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. This is a wrap.
Go ahead, Gene.
It's a wrap.